So I would like to start by just showing our logo and our domain name. I think long explanations are not really necessary. I show you a little show reel. We are basically a design company based in Austria. We are really designing stuff and not very much building things, but we have a very strong technical focus. So all the projects we do involve some kind of hardware development. This is an interactive dance floor that tracks the movements of the dancers. We have built a multi-touch table. We develop software for the interactive installations. We mostly work for industrial clients, corporate clients. So our research is mainly very much related to projects we are commissioned to do. We do art installations, we do museum pieces, we do projections onto facades. So we try to work in the middle of art and design and try to do all the unusual things. Our clients like to call us and say, I don't know who to call, maybe you can help me. And this is our main focus. We do very big projections. These were 42 projectors around a really big hall of 100 and something meters. So our main focus is projections, projection mapping and live tracking of artists in this case. We like to work together with universities and researchers to get the newest technologies and the newest methods of doing stuff. And so this is a world sphere, and then we do classical design and animation. I will skip this part because it's not very interesting. So this is our background, and this is how we came to the long distance art. The long distance art is a project that was initiated by a classical ad agency called Jun von Matt. They had the idea, let's do something with robots. Robots are cool, we need robots, we don't have any idea how robots work, what they do, how you program them or anything basically. But we invited to a first meeting. This was in the beginning of 2012, and we came there. They said, yeah, we need a conductor or an artist or a painter or a musician or something, and he has to do something with the robot. All right. Then 1 year passed. There was 1 year of talking with the client, with people, with robotics companies. And it was a really big problem because all the robotics companies we asked, hey, can we use your robots to do real-time stuff? They said, no, that is just not possible. And finally, ABB decided to lend us a robot and said, yeah, you can have it, but it won't work. And we said, okay, let's do a test setup. So our client wasn't very much encouraged by all this information that we got from everywhere, where everybody said it won't work, but we managed to get them to pay for the test setup. It was quite lucky. Then we had the second test setup sometimes in August. So from the first test setup, which was successful, I have to add, that was the only reason why the project was funded. Then we had the second test setup, so we had 1 month again to finish everything, and then on the 26th of September then we had the final presentation. The first thing we did is we needed a tracking system for the artists. So we figured before we can give the robot some coordinates, we need to have some kind of tracking system so that we can track his movements. A task that wasn't that simple actually, because there are lots of experimental tracking systems and tracking systems that cost 200,000 euros. You get everything experimental and everything very expensive, but you can't get things that are affordable and work. because the most important thing was reliability, of course. We have just one day, everything has to work. It's not that we can postpone an event that has been set up. So we tried this tracking system and we recorded the motions and we were quite happy with it. So we asked the company who programmed and who did this tracking system to help us with the test setup. After we figured out, okay, this is the tracking system we want to use, our robot came. This was a small ABB 2600, if I remember correctly, and this is how we got it. We set it up and we said, okay, first things, he needs to hold a pen. So what did they do? They just took a screwdriver, put a screw to a pen, and we put it in this holding mechanism. This wasn't a very good idea because it just didn't work. Then we set up the whole system, and this was basically the first drawing test we did. This was after about 1.5 weeks of trying to get the robot to accept our 60 new positions a second, and it just didn't work. It froze all the time and it didn't work. And then we figured out that we had this little debugging console on the handheld remote, and to feed back 60 frames a second to the remote control was the problem. So everything would have worked basically from the start if we wouldn't have given this debug data to our handheld remote control. This was 1 week of trying everything before we figured out that this caused the problem. So we were really happy when the robot started drawing the first time. But back then the concept was street art. So street artists need one thing, and this is This is when we realized that the robot does everything that we do. We didn't know that before. This was a really funny moment when we realized, okay, it's not just for painting, it can do all the motions that we do. So then the client came up, okay, street art needs stencils, so we have this robot that can do everything we do, and we spray paint stencils with it. So the most boring application you can have for a robot that you can control in real time, because to make a stencil, you don't need an artist basically. You need an artist to create the stencil, but you don't need an artist to spray the stencil. It was funny anyways, so we recorded it. This is a little video of the test setup so that you see how this 6-camera tracking system was set up. The problem was, in the end, it wasn't really stable and reliable, because we had only this one day of this event, which was scheduled to be from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. It was 1 year of work of many companies, and we just had one day for everything to come together and to work in 3 locations. So the most important thing was reliability, and everything has to be reproducible. And this wasn't the case with this test setup, with this tracker, but we managed to get a nice video. We had the illustrator there, and she drew the first real drawing. You can see all these wiggly lines. This was because we had the pen in a very movable, it wasn't very fixed, so the pen had this possibility to wiggle around, but it created a very interesting result. Then we searched for an artist. This is when Alex, who is not here today, and he wished he was here, but they kicked him out of his gallery space, so he had to move all his stuff, and it was a really big problem. So I am here today. But this was only after the test setup that we looked for an artist who can work with the robot, which wasn't as easy as you would expect, because artists are very afraid of new technologies, because it could ruin their art career, because the art world looks upon them and says, this is not art, this is a robot. Robot cannot do art, so you are not an artist. this was really his fear. This it was a well-founded fear. As you can see here, this is a new drawing board. We decided to kick all 3D tracking overboard and just use what protocol to the robot, and on the robot there's this the robot programming, the rapid program that transforms our coordinates into the movements of the robots. And the most difficult thing is those robots have 5 axes and they can move basically everywhere, but they have to know in advance where they're going to be, because there are certain positions of the axis where they just cannot pass, so they cannot free themselves from their own movement patterns. So we had to anticipate where the artist was going to avoid these stops of the robots. He would just stop and we would have to move him out of this position, singularity it's called, to start moving him again. As you can see here, we have also a little red dot on the pen. This red dot was tracked via Kinect, best 3D tracking tool ever. Cheapest and most reliable, and it just works. In combination with the 2D frame, perfect, for a fraction of the cost. This was the finished artwork, at least 2 or 3, because the concept was that the artist was painting 1 and 2 halves of the heads, and so this was what the artist was doing, and this is what the robot was doing. You can see it's somehow similar, but in the eye you see it's not as perfect. This was something that fascinated the artist very much, because he said the robot has its own style somehow. He has its own way of doing what I'm doing. Then the second robot came. Then we had the photo shooting with the robot, because the ad agency needed very good pictures of the robot, so he was put in a really well lit studio, and he was posing like a professional. The photographer said, yeah, a little more up and a little more down, a little to the left. The robot did everything exactly as the photographer said. So the photographer was very happy with his model. He wasn't moving, he was really still. He said if all models were like this robot, he would be a happy photographer. We created a little iPad app where we could just draw, nothing special, just put in the IP address of the robot and draw, and the robot would draw. So very simple app, very complicated stuff in the background. And this is the last thing I'm going to show you. This is the documentation video that was produced by our client. Just to give you an idea, this whole project cost about €500,000 in the end, because the logistics of it were quite problematic. So this was the first test setup. Some footage I've showed already. This is a robot programmer. He was really wanted it to be raining in London, and in London we had the nicest weather. It was really warm and beautiful. It was once in a lifetime weather for London, and in Berlin it had 0 degrees and it was raining. So this is what the artist was painting, and at the same time we had a satellite connection to the 2 cities. And over the satellite connection with not as much delay as I would have expected, the robots got the data and started drawing. We had this live view, so in London in this case we saw Vienna and Berlin, and in Vienna we saw London and Berlin, and in Berlin we saw Vienna and London. You can see these straight lines. These were flashes from photographers. They disturbed the infrared frame. We tested it and it never happened, but this one photographer had some strange kind of flash mounted, and he really made our infrared frame crazy. Okay, I think that's about it. Another 20 seconds to go. So that basically everything that happened while some signal was inside the infrared frame was handled by the infrared frame, and as soon as the artist left the frame, the Kinect took over. And this is the final result. He painted 3 different pictures over the course of 8 hours. And we had lots and lots of visitors. We had a live stream that had about 6,000 visitors. And the media really loved it. The opinions were mixed. Is it art or is it not? Somebody said yes, the others said no. We had about 600 stories in all the great publications, the Mail online, great. Bild, Spiegel. So robots can really draw lots of attention. This was the main reason why we convinced the client to use a robot for this project. But yeah, robots work. That's basically the message. So this is one of the art paintings. And here you can see what the artist did. So that's about all I can tell you about this presentation, about this project. I mean, I could tell you a lot more, especially the problems we had for finding a nice foundation for the robot to stand on, because the robot had to be standing 2 meters high, and those robots have quite an acceleration and have quite some forces they put on their foundations. The guys in Berlin just created a concrete block with 1.5 meters by 1.5 meters of surface area. It was 2 meters high. This was perfect. The guys in London decided, no, we can do that with water, and they created a water tank, and it was the robot nearly knocked over the stage because the water started rocking, and it was really stressful there. But then we figured out how to find a solution, and everything worked in the end. But there were lots of little problems in this project, but in the end it worked, and that's all that counts. Thank you.
Yeah.